I thought I knew what betrayal looked like until a simple DNA test showed me that the two people I trusted most in this world had been living a lie right under my nose. What started as innocent curiosity about my son's eye color ended up destroying my marriage and tearing my family apart in ways I never imagined possible. My name is Emma, and at 32, I thought I had it all figured out. I was married to my college sweetheart, Jake. For 8 years, we had a beautiful 3-year-old son named Oliver, and I lived just 20 minutes away from my younger sister Rachel, who had always been my best friend and closest confidant. Jake and I met during our sophomore year at State University. I was studying elementary education, and he was pursuing business management. We literally bumped into each other at the campus coffee shop when I was rushing to my morning class with arms full of textbooks and a steaming latte. He helped me pick up my scattered papers, and something about his genuine laugh and the way he made sure I was unhurt before even checking his own coffee-stained shirt made my heart skip a beat. We talked for 3 hours that day, completely missing our respective classes. Our relationship moved fast, but it felt right. Within 6 months, we were practically living together, splitting time between his dorm and my tiny apartment off campus. Jake was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Ambitious, funny, and incredibly family-oriented. He came from a close-knit Italian family, and Sunday dinners at his parents' house became a weekly tradition that I absolutely loved. The way his mom would fuss over me and his dad would tell the same stories every week made me feel like I belonged somewhere special. After graduation, we moved back to our hometown and got a small apartment together. Jake landed a job at a local marketing firm, and I started teaching 3rd grade at the elementary school I had attended as a child. It was like coming full circle, and everything felt perfectly planned. We got engaged 2 years later during a weekend trip to the mountains, where we had gone camping with my family when we were dating. Rachel was my maid of honor, of course. She's 2 years younger than me, and growing up we were inseparable. While I was always the responsible older sister who did her homework and followed rules, Rachel was the free spirit. Artistic, spontaneous, and incredibly beautiful in that effortless way that made everyone turn their heads when she walked into a room. She had long dark hair that she wore in these perfectly messy waves, striking green eyes, and this infectious laugh that could light up any room. Even though we were different, we never had that typical sibling rivalry. I was genuinely proud of her artistic talents. She was an incredible painter and had this eye for photography that blew me away. After high school, she went to art school in the city, but moved back home after a few years, saying she missed family too much to stay away. She got a job at a local gallery and seemed happy, though she never had a serious relationship that lasted more than a few months. Jake and Rachel got along great from the beginning. He appreciated her artistic perspective, and she loved his sense of humor. The three of us would often hang out together, going to movies, having dinner parties at our place, or taking weekend trips to nearby lakes or hiking trails. Rachel was the kind of person who could make friends with anyone. She had this way of making even quiet Jake come out of his shell and be more adventurous. When Oliver was born 3 years ago, Rachel was right there in the hospital waiting room with Jake's parents and mine. She cried when she first held him, telling me she had never seen anything so perfect. She became the most devoted aunt I could have imagined, always volunteering to babysit, showing up with little gifts and toys, and taking hundreds of photos of Oliver that she would edit and frame for us. Jake was an amazing father from day one. He would get up for night feedings without complaint, spent hours just staring at Oliver in wonder, and was always talking about the future he wanted to build for our family. We bought a house when Oliver turned 1. Nothing fancy, but it had a big backyard and was in a good school district. Jake worked overtime to make sure we could afford it, and I felt so grateful for how hard he worked to provide for us. Rachel helped us move and spent the first weekend painting Oliver's nursery with these beautiful murals of forest. Animals that looked like they belonged in a children's book. She had this natural way with Oliver that amazed me. He would stop crying instantly when she held him. And as he got older, he would light up whenever Auntie Roch came over. Our life felt stable, happy, and full of love. Jake and I rarely fought, and when we did, it was usually about small things like whose turn it was to do dishes or whether we could afford a vacation that year. We had date nights twice a month, thanks to Rachel's enthusiastic babysitting, and we still laughed together every day. I felt incredibly lucky to have married my best friend and to have such a close relationship with my sister. Family gatherings were always warm and chaotic in the best way. Jake's family had embraced Rachel like another daughter, and my parents treated Jake like the son they never had. Oliver was the center of everyone's universe, and watching all the people I loved dote on my child made my heart feel so full it might burst. I remember thinking just a few months before everything fell apart that this was what happiness looked like. This was the life I had dreamed of as a little girl. A loving husband, a beautiful child, family nearby, and a future that stretched out ahead of us full of possibilities. I felt secure in a way that I had never experienced before. Like I was exactly where I belonged, with exactly the right people, living exactly the right life. Looking back now, I realize how naive that sense of security really was. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in early spring. I was picking Oliver up from preschool when his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, made what seemed like an innocent comment that would end up haunting me for months. "You know, Emma," she said as Oliver ran ahead to the playground, "keep trying to figure out who Oliver gets those beautiful hazel eyes from. They're such an unusual color. Not quite brown, not quite green. Does Jake have relatives with eyes like that?" I laughed it off at the time, telling her that genetics were funny and that maybe he got them from some distant relative we didn't know about. But as I drove home, I found myself glancing in the rearview mirror at Oliver's reflection. His eyes were striking. A warm hazel with gold flecks that seemed to change color depending on the light. Jake's eyes were deep brown, almost black, and mine were blue. I had never really thought about it before, but now that Mrs. Patterson had mentioned it, it did seem unusual. That evening, I casually brought it up to Jake while we were making dinner. "Isn't it funny how Oliver got hazel eyes when both of us have dark eyes?" I asked, stirring pasta sauce and not really thinking much of it. Jake paused for just a split second too long before answering. "Yeah, genetics are weird. My grandmother had light eyes, I think. Must be from her." Something about his response felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the way he didn't look at me when he said it, or how quickly he changed the subject to asking about my day at work. I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing other little things. Oliver's hair was getting lighter as he got older, taking on these golden highlights that looked nothing like Jake's dark hair or my medium brown. His face shape was different too, more angular, with higher cheekbones, that definitely didn't come from either of our families. And there was something about his smile, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other, that felt familiar, but not in a way I could place. The thoughts started keeping me awake at night. I would lie there next to Jake, listening to him breathe, and wonder if I was losing my mind. Oliver was our son. I had carried him for 9 months, felt every kick, been there for every milestone. Of course, he was Jake's child, but the doubt had planted itself in my mind like a weed, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it kept growing. Things got worse when Rachel came over for dinner one Friday night in April. She was playing with Oliver in the living room after we ate, making silly faces and taking pictures of him with her phone. I was washing dishes in the kitchen when I heard her call out to Jake, who was watching TV. "Jake, come look at this picture I just took of Oliver. Doesn't he look exactly like Tommy Morrison from high school? Remember Tommy? He had those same hazel eyes and that exact same smile." My blood went cold. Tommy Morrison had been Rachel's Anandoff boyfriend senior year of high school. I remembered him well, tall, athletic, with striking hazel eyes and dirty blonde hair. But more than that, I remembered how Rachel had been completely obsessed with him and how heartbroken she was when he left for college and they broke up. I turned around to see Jake's reaction, and what I saw made my stomach drop. His face had gone completely pale, and he was staring at Rachel with an expression I had never seen before, something between panic and warning. Rachel seemed oblivious, still cooing at Oliver and taking more pictures. I don't see it," Jake said flatly, not taking his eyes off Rachel. "Oliver looks like Oliver." But I saw it now. The resemblance was subtle, but unmistakable once you were looking for it. The eyes, the smile, even the way Oliver tilted his head when he was concentrating on something. It all reminded me of Tommy Morrison. Later that night, after Rachel had gone home and Oliver was asleep, I tried to bring it up casually with Jake. It was funny what Rachel said about Oliver looking like that guy from high school. I could kind of see it, actually. Jake's response was immediate and sharp. "That's ridiculous, Emma. Rachel sees what she wants to see. Oliver is our son. End of discussion. The way he said end of discussion sent a chill down my spine. Jake never talked to me like that. We had always been the couple who talked everything through, who didn't have forbidden topics or conversations we couldn't have. His reaction was so defensive, so unlike him, that it confirmed rather than calmed my growing fears. I started paying attention to Jake and Rachel's interactions in a way I never had before. At family gatherings, I noticed how they seemed to have inside jokes I wasn't part of. How Rachel would touch Jake's arm when she laughed at something he said. How Jake's whole demeanor would change when Rachel walked into a room. He became more animated, more charming, more like the version of himself I remembered from college. The worst part was realizing that I had been blind to signs that now seemed obvious. Rachel never dated seriously, but she was always around. She volunteered to babysit constantly, even when Jake and I weren't going anywhere special. She had keys to our house and would sometimes just show up unannounced. She knew Jake's schedule better than I did sometimes, always seeming to drop by when he was home. But I was at work. One evening in May, I was looking through old photos on my phone when I found a picture from Oliver's first birthday party. In the background, barely visible, Jake and Rachel were standing close together by the kitchen counter. Rachel's hand was on Jake's chest, and they were looking at each other with an intensity that made my stomach churn. How had I missed that at the time? The doubt was consuming me, affecting my sleep, my appetite, my ability to focus on anything else. I found myself analyzing every conversation, every glance, every moment the three of us had shared over the past 3 years. The life I thought I knew was starting to feel like an elaborate lie, and I didn't know how much longer I could pretend everything was normal. By June, the uncertainty was eating me alive. I'd lost 15 pounds without trying, was barely sleeping, and started snapping at my students over minor things that normally wouldn't bother me. My principal even pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay at home, which was mortifying because I had always prided myself on being professional and composed at work. The breaking point came during Oliver's 3rd birthday party. We had invited both families, and I spent the entire afternoon watching Jake and Rachel interact like I was conducting some kind of investigation. Every shared laugh, every casual touch, every moment they seemed to communicate without words felt like evidence of something I couldn't quite name, but desperately feared. At one point, Rachel was helping Oliver blow out his candles while Jake stood behind them both, his hands on Rachel's shoulders. Someone took a picture, and when I saw it later, we looked like a family, just not the family I thought we were. Jake and Rachel looked natural together, comfortable, while I seemed like an outsider looking in on my own life. That night, after everyone had gone home and we were cleaning up the party debris, I finally worked up the courage to ask Jake directly. "Jake, I need you to be honest with me about something," I said, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Have you ever been unfaithful to me?" He stopped wiping down the counter and looked at me with what seemed like genuine confusion. "Emma, what are you talking about? Of course not." "Where is this coming from?" "I don't know. I just feel like something's been off lately. I keep having these weird thoughts about Oliver not looking like either of us." "And stop," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind.
Hey, you're being paranoid. You've been stressed with work and tired from dealing with a 3-year-old.
Oliver is our son. I've never cheated on you, and I think you need to talk to someone if these thoughts are keeping you up at night. His response should have reassured me. But instead, it made me feel like I was going crazy. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the stress of teaching and motherhood had finally gotten to me, and I was imagining problems that didn't exist. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was wrong with my understanding of my own life. I spent the next week researching DNA testing online during my lunch breaks at school. I learned about paternity tests, how accurate they were, how easy they had become to do at home. The logical part of my brain knew this was crossing a line. Testing my own husband's paternity without his knowledge felt like the ultimate betrayal of trust. But the desperate part of my brain that needed answers was stronger than my moral reservations. The decision crystallized one afternoon when I was going through Oliver's baby book, looking at newborn photos. In one picture, he was just hours old, still red and wrinkled. And he was making this little expression with one eyebrow raised that looked exactly like an expression I had seen Rachel make 1,000 times. It was such a specific, distinctive look that I felt like I was seeing a puzzle piece click into place. I ordered the DNA test kit online that same day, using my personal credit card and having it delivered to the school where I worked. My hands were shaking when I clicked purchase, but I felt like I was finally taking action instead of slowly losing my mind to speculation and doubt. When the kit arrived 3 days later, I stared at the small box for hours before opening it. Inside was everything I needed to collect DNA samples from Oliver and Jake. Simple cheek swabs that would take less than a minute each. The instructions were straightforward, almost insultingly easy for something that could potentially destroy my entire life. I collected Oliver's sample first, during his afternoon nap. He barely stirred when I gently rubbed the swab inside his cheek, lost in whatever toddler dreams were playing in his head. Looking at his peaceful face, I felt a wave of guilt so strong it nearly made me stop the whole thing. This was my baby, regardless of genetics.
Right.
He was the child I had carried and delivered and loved every single day of his life. Did it really matter whose DNA he carried? But I had gone too far to turn back now. I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed everything. Getting Jake's sample was harder. I waited until he was in a deep sleep one Friday night, after he had worked a particularly long day. My heart was beating so loudly, I was convinced it would wake him up, but he didn't stir when I carefully collected the sample. Looking at him sleeping peacefully beside me, I felt like I was crossing a line that I could never uncross. Whether the results confirmed my fears or proved my suspicions wrong. This moment would always be between us. This moment when I chose doubt over trust. I mailed the samples the next morning, using the prepaid envelope that came with the kit. The return address was a laboratory in California that I had never heard of. And as I dropped the envelope in the mailbox outside the post office, I felt like I was mailing away my old life, regardless of what the results would say. The waiting period was supposed to be 7 to 10 business days, but it felt like months. Every day, I checked my email compulsively, looking for the message that would either restore my peace of mind or confirm my worst nightmare. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, and I found myself unable to look Jake in the eye without wondering if I was looking at a liar. Rachel came over for dinner that Wednesday, exactly 1 week after I had mailed the samples. Watching her interact with Oliver and Jake felt surreal, like I was seeing them through completely different eyes. Were they a secret family that I had somehow missed? Had I been living as an outsider in my own life for 3 years? I excused myself early and went to bed, claiming I had a headache. As I lay there listening to Jake and Rachel's laughter from the living room, I realized that whatever the test results said, my life as I knew it was already over. I could never go back to the innocent trust I had felt just months before, and that loss felt almost as devastating as any affair could have been. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 7:23 a.m. while I was making coffee and packing Oliver's lunch for preschool. Subject line read, "Your DNA test results are ready," and seeing those words made my knees go weak. I had been waiting for this moment for 10 days, but now that it was here, I felt completely unprepared. Jake was in the shower, and Oliver was eating cereal at the kitchen table, chattering about something that had happened at school the day before. The normalcy of the morning felt absurd given what I was about to discover. I stared at the email on my phone screen for several minutes, my finger hovering over the link, before deciding I couldn't open it with my family right there. "Mommy, you okay?" Oliver asked, looking at me with those hazel eyes that had started this whole nightmare. "You look scared." "Mine fine, baby," I managed, forcing a smile. "Mommy just remembered something she needs to do for work." I waited until Jake left for his job, and Oliver was settled at preschool before driving to a coffee shop across town, where I was sure I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I ordered a large latte I didn't want and found a corner table where I could sit with my back to the wall. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. The results page loaded slowly, and for a moment I thought about closing the browser and pretending this had never happened. I could delete the email, throw away any evidence, and go back to my life of willful ignorance. But I had come too far to turn back now. The page finally loaded completely, and there it was in black and white. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Below that devastating number were more technical details that I barely absorbed. Something about genetic markers and statistical analysis, but all I could focus on was that 0. Jake was not Oliver's biological father. The child I had carried for 9 months, delivered in excruciating pain. and loved with every fiber of my being was not genetically connected to the man I had married. I sat in that coffee shop and cried harder than I had ever cried in my life. Deep, body-shaking sobs that made other customers stare and a concerned barista ask if I needed help. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, was built on a lie, and that lie was now scientifically proven. When I finally composed myself enough to drive home, my mind was racing with implications and questions. If Jake wasn't Oliver's father, then who was? The obvious answer, the one I had been trying not to think about for months, was staring me in the face. Tommy Morrison. The boy Rachel had dated in high school. The boy who looked exactly like my son. But that would mean Rachel hadn't just been sleeping with my husband. She had gotten pregnant by him, and somehow convinced me the baby was mine. The logistics of that deception seemed impossible until I started remembering the timeline more carefully. 3.5 years ago, I had been trying to get pregnant for months without success. Rachel had been going through a particularly difficult breakup, and had been staying at our house frequently, sometimes for weeks at a time. She had been emotional, vulnerable, and Jake had been incredibly kind to her, offering her the spare bedroom whenever she needed it and being the supportive brother-in-law she needed. During that same period, I had been working overtime to prepare for a state evaluation at my school, often leaving early in the morning and coming home late at night. There had been plenty of opportunities for Jake and Rachel to be alone together, and I had been too focused on work and trying to conceive to pay attention to what was happening in my own house. The pregnancy had been a surprise when it finally happened. I remembered being so excited that I had taken 4 different tests to make sure, and Jake had seemed stunned, but happy. Rachel had cried when I told her she was going to be an aunt, and I had attributed her emotional response to her own recent heartbreak and her joy at becoming part of our family in this new way. Now, I was wondering if those tears had been guilt, not joy. Had she been crying because she knew the baby I was so excited about was actually hers? Had she and Jake been planning this deception from the beginning, or had it been a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control? The drive home felt like an out-of-body experience. I kept thinking about all the times Rachel had volunteered to babysit, how natural she was with Oliver, how much she seemed to love being his aunt. She hadn't been acting like his aunt. She had been acting like his mother, and I had been too blind to see it. I also thought about Jake's behavior over the past 3 years. His devotion to Oliver, which I had admired so much, now seemed suspicious. Had he been overcompensating for his guilt? Was his love for Oliver real? Or was it an act designed to cover up the truth? When I got home, I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, staring at the house Jake and I had bought together. The house where Rachel had painted murals for the son who was actually hers. The white picket fence. The garden we had planted together. The swing set in the backyard. It all looked the same, but everything had changed. I finally went inside and called my school, telling them I had a family emergency and wouldn't be able to come in for the rest of the week. Then I sat at my kitchen table with the DNA test results printed out in front of me, trying to figure out how to confront the 2 people who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. The house felt different now, like a crime scene where evidence of a 3-year deception was hidden in every corner. Family photos on the mantle looked like lies. Oliver's artwork on the refrigerator felt like proof of a relationship I had never understood, and the bed I shared with Jake felt contaminated by secrets I was only beginning to comprehend. I had spent months wondering if I was losing my mind, but now I knew the truth. I hadn't been going crazy. I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and now that illusion was shattered beyond repair. I spent 2 days planning exactly how I would confront them. 2 days of barely eating, calling in sick to work, and sending Oliver to stay with my parents under the pretense that I was coming down with something contagious. 2 days of rehearsing conversations in my head and trying to decide whether to confront Jake first, Rachel first, or both of them together. I finally decided to start with Jake. He deserved to know that I knew, and part of me hoped that he would break down and confess everything, that there would be some explanation that could make this betrayal less devastating than it appeared. Thursday evening. I waited until Jake got home from work and had settled into his usual routine of changing clothes and checking his phone. I sat him down at our kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten thousands of meals together, where we had planned our future and discussed our dreams. I got some test results back today, I said, placing the printed DNA report on the table between us. Oliver isn't your son? Jake's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, shock, and then something that looked almost like relief. For a moment, neither of us said anything. He stared at the paper. I watched his shoulders slump as the weight of 3 years of deception finally became too heavy to carry. "Emma, I can explain," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Can you?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded when I felt like screaming. "Can you explain how my husband got my sister pregnant and then let me believe the baby was mine? Can you explain 3 years of lying to my face every single day?" Jake started crying then, not the quiet tears I had seen from him a few times during movies or when Oliver was born, but deep, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. "Happened once," he said through his tears. "Just once, when you were working those crazy hours for the school evaluation. Rachel was staying here. She was so upset about her breakup, and we had been drinking wine and talking, and it just happened. We both regretted it immediately." "Once," I said, my voice getting louder, despite my efforts to stay calm. "It only takes once to get someone pregnant, Jake. And then what? You both decided to just never mention it and let me raise her child." "We didn't know," he said desperately. "Rachel found out she was pregnant right around the same time you did. We did the math, and we weren't sure whose baby it was. We hoped it was yours, and when Oliver was born, he looked like he could be either of ours, so you just what?"
Ow.
"Decided to keep lying. Decided to let me bond with a child who was on mine, while his actual mother pretended to be his aunt." Jake was crying too hard to answer coherently, but his silence was answer enough. They had made a conscious decision to maintain the deception, week after week, month after month, year after year. Every family gathering, every milestone, every moment of joy I had felt watching Oliver grow up had been built on their lie. "Does Rachel know about the DNA test?" I asked. Jake shook his head. "She doesn't know you suspected anything." "Emma, please. We never meant for this to happen. We love you. We love Oliver. We've been a family." "We have not been a family," I snapped, finally losing the composure I had been clinging to. "A family doesn't lie about who the children belong to. A family doesn't let someone fall in love with a child who is unthirst while the real parents pretend to be aunt and uncle." I called Rachel immediately, putting the phone on speaker so Jake could hear. "Hey, Em, what's up?" She answered cheerfully, and the casualness in her voice after what I had just learned made me furious. "I need you to come over right now," I said. "There's something we need to discuss as a family." "Is everything okay? You sound weird. Just come over, Rachel." Now, she arrived 20 minutes later, letting herself in with her key like she always did. When she saw Jake's tear-stained face and the DNA results on the table, her expression changed immediately. "God," she whispered, sinking into a chair across from us. "Surprise," I said bitterly. "Turns out Oliver isn't Jake's son. Care to explain how that happened?" Rachel started crying before she even tried to speak. "Emma, I'm so sorry. We never meant for this to happen. It was one stupid night, and when I realized I might be pregnant, you had just found out you were pregnant too. And you thought maybe you could trick me into raising your child. Well, you got to be the fun aunt with none of the responsibility." "No," Rachel said desperately. "It wasn't like that. We genuinely didn't know whose baby it was at first. And then when Oliver was born, and you were so happy, and he seemed like he could belong to either of us genetically, you just decided to keep lying to me for 3 years. We were scared," Jake said quietly. "We were scared of losing you, scared of breaking up the family, scared of what it would do to Oliver if he found out. What it would do to Oliver." I stood up, pacing around the kitchen. What about what it's done to me? What about the fact that I've spent 3 years loving a child who belongs to someone else? What about the fact that my husband and my sister have been lying to my face every single day? The confrontation went on for hours. There were more tears, more confessions, more details about their betrayal that made everything worse. Rachel admitted that she had volunteered to babysit so often because she could unbear to be away from her son. Jake admitted that he had been overcompensating with Oliver out of guilt. They both swore that they had never been together again after that one night, but I didn't know if I could believe anything either of them said anymore. By the end of the night, I had asked them both to leave. Jake went to stay with his parents, and Rachel drove back to her apartment in tears. I was alone in the house for the first time in 3 years, surrounded by evidence of the life I thought I had been living. The silence was deafening, but it was also honest in a way that nothing had been for longer than I cared to calculate. The weeks that followed the confrontation were the darkest of my life. I took a leave of absence from work, unable to focus on teaching, when my own world had completely collapsed. The house felt like a museum of lies. Every family photo, every piece of Oliver's artwork on the refrigerator, every room where we had made memories together, is what I thought was a family. The legal implications were complicated and heartbreaking. Technically, Oliver wasn't my biological child, but I was his mother in every way that mattered. I had carried him for 9 months, been there for his birth, raised him for 3 years, and loved him unconditionally. Rachel might be his biological mother, but she had willingly given up any claim to that role when she chose deception over honesty. My lawyer explained that because Jake's name was on the birth certificate, and we had been married when Oliver was born, he was legally considered Jake's son regardless of biology. But the custody arrangements would be complicated by the fact that Rachel was his biological mother. The whole situation was a legal nightmare that nobody seemed quite sure how to navigate. The hardest part was explaining to Oliver, in age-appropriate terms, why Daddy was living at Grandma and Grandpa's house, and why Mommy was sad all the time. How do you tell a 3-year-old that his entire family structure was built on a lie? How do you explain that the people he trusted most in the world had been keeping a secret that changed everything about who he was and where he belonged? I decided to prioritize Oliver's emotional well-being above everything else, even my own pain. He needed stability, consistency, and love, regardless of whose DNA he carried. I arranged for him to continue his normal routines: preschool, playdates, visits with grandparents. While Jake and I worked through lawyers to figure out custody and divorce proceedings, Rachel tried to reach out multiple times in those first few weeks. She sent long, tearful text messages about how sorry she was, how much she loved me, how she wanted to make things right. She sent flowers with notes about how she never meant to hurt me. She even showed up at my house one evening begging me to let her explain. But there was nothing left to explain. The facts were simple. My husband and my sister had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, and they had maintained that betrayal for 3 years. There was no apology big enough, no explanation satisfactory enough to undo that level of deception. The divorce proceedings took 6 months. Jake didn't fight me on anything: custody, property division, alimony. I think his guilt made him generous. Or maybe he just wanted the whole situation to be over as quickly as possible. We agreed to joint custody of Oliver.
Oliver!
With me having primary residence and Jake getting alternating weekends and 1 evening per week. What surprised me was how quickly I adapted to my new normal. Being a single mother was challenging, but it was also honest in a way that my marriage had stopped being years before I realized it. Every decision I made was based on reality, rather than the illusion I had been living in. Every conversation with Oliver was straightforward, rather than filtered through layers of deception. Rachel and I didn't speak for over a year. The sister who had been my best friend, my closest confidant, and my partner in crime growing up, became a stranger overnight. Family gatherings were impossible. How do you have Thanksgiving dinner with your ex-husband and the sister who helped him lie to you for 3 years? My parents were devastated, torn between their 2 daughters and unsure how to navigate the destruction of what had once been such a close family. The turning point came when Oliver started asking more questions about why Aunt Rachel didn't come around anymore. He missed her, and I realized that regardless of my feelings about her betrayal, she was still his biological mother. He had a right to know her, and she had a right to be part of his life, even if that relationship could never be the same as it had been. We started with supervised visits. Rachel would come to the house for a few hours on Sunday afternoons to spend time with Oliver. It was awkward and painful at first, but Oliver's joy at seeing his aunt again made it bearable. Gradually, we worked out a system where Rachel could take Oliver for outings, have him overnight occasionally, and be a consistent presence in his life. The relationship between Rachel and me will never be what it was. Too much trust has been broken. Too many lies have been told. But we found a way to coexist for Oliver's sake. We're civil, sometimes even warm, but the easy intimacy we once shared is gone forever.